Total War 3 Kingdoms is dead. I'm sure you've all heard by now that a few days ago Creative Assembly posted a video which announced that they have ended patch support for 3 Kingdoms and cancelled all future DLC plans that they had for the game. The news came as a shock to many, and the reaction from the community has been passionate, to say the least. But putting aside the slightly patronising and condescending tone of the video,
and we're ecstatic that so many of you have put your powers of strategic thinking to the fearsome challenge of our game.
The death of 3 Kingdoms raises some interesting questions about the future of the Total War franchise. Now, let me preface this video by saying 3 Kingdoms is probably the game I've played the least out of any Total War game. I wasn't a fan at all at launch. I really don't like romance mode, and records mode is pretty boring for me, at least, so while this particular decision doesn't affect me personally, the manner in which Creative Assembly have unceremoniously killed off one of their major releases should be a concern for all Total War fans, whether you personally enjoyed 3 Kingdoms or not. Before we answer the question, what does the death of 3 Kingdoms mean for the future of Total War, first we have to look at why it's being ended. On release, 3 Kingdoms exploded, and it really isn't an overstatement to say that. It was Total War's biggest Steam launch in history, with over 190,000 concurrent players at its peak. That's 100,000 more than even Warhammer 2 had on launch, which is crazy. So you might think, with such a massive launch, one even bigger than Total War's arguably most popular game, how has this game failed? Well, despite the massive launch, the drop-off was equally as spectacular. Within just a few months, the average player count had gone from over 100,000 at launch to less than 10,000, and it stayed roughly at that level pretty much ever since. One of the most shocking statistics I found during the making of this video is that, at the time of recording at least, Rome 2 has more players than 3 Kingdoms. That's right, an 8-year-old game that had the most infamous launch in Total War history has more people playing it in 2021 than Total War's biggest release from 2 years ago, and that's even factoring in a 7% increase of players, which has presumably come from the result of the announcement video. That's actually quite shocking, and I think that really puts into perspective how far 3 Kingdoms has fallen since its release. By the way, I just want to say I actually really like Rome 2, and through patches and DLC it's actually turned into a really solid game, so it shouldn't be a surprise that a lot of people play that game still, but what is surprising is that a newer, bigger release is still lagging behind it. Now, that's the shocking thing really. 3 Kingdoms has been a divisive game from the start, with some players like me who really didn't like it, but some players who really loved it. But that kind of drop-off wouldn't have really mattered if the DLC had sold at a consistent level. If it had sold consistently, even at a lower rate, the game probably would have survived, but they didn't, and that's not the customer's fault. The DLC just wasn't that good. Even before they were review bombed into oblivion, the reception to all of the DLC has been pretty mixed. It could be viewed that the historical title Steam sale at the beginning of May was a last-ditch attempt to inject some life into the game and ramp up some DLC sales, but with its sudden cancellation just 2 weeks later, I think we can assume that that probably failed. By the way, I do find it interesting that the announcement came 2 weeks later after the majority of people who did buy the game on Steam sale wouldn't be able to get it refunded. I'm not sure if there's malicious intent there or not, but the timing is interesting nonetheless. So, looking at this evidence, it shouldn't be too much of a surprise then that support for the game has ended. But the twist of the dagger here is that in the same video, they announced a sequel.
Our team, who has been working from home over the past year, now has transitioned into pre-production for our next entry in the 3 Kingdoms universe.
That's right, they're abandoning 3 Kingdoms to work on 3 Kingdoms 2, or whatever they're going to call it. In a comment below the video, they even confirmed that the sequel will not connect to the original. So it's the Napoleon Empire Attila Rome 2 situation all over again. And that's the thing that all Total War fans should be worried about. That's the thing that's concerning. They're killing one game and leaving it unfinished, bugs included, so they can make an extra buck upselling the sequel to the fans of the original game. It's a blatant disregard for the consumers, and it makes you ask the question, how can we trust any Total War release in the future? How do we know that 2 years down the line, support isn't going to be ripped from the game and we're left with an unfinished buggy mess? What happens if they release Medieval 3 or Empire 2 and the same situation happens again? The answer is, unfortunately, we probably will trust them again, and we probably will just keep buying all the new games because this isn't a new trend. As I mentioned briefly, this exact situation has happened about 3 times before already with Rome 2 and Empire. So when answering the question, what does the death of Three Kingdoms mean for the future of Total War, the answer is business as usual, because for the last 10 years, this has been Creative Assembly's business model. They did the exact same thing with Napoleon and Empire, Fall of the Samurai and Shogun 2, and Attila and Rome 2. So ultimately, this doesn't really change anything for Creative Assembly. The reason CEA think they can get away with this is because they already have 3 times already. And ultimately, that means we've fallen for it 3 times already. And here's the thing, the vast majority of us are not naive. Alright, we know that Creative Assembly is a business and that video games exist to make them money, so we're not naive enough to think that Creative Assembly would support a game that loses them money. However, I think the disturbing element to the situation is, well, 2 things really. One, that they would be so brazen about screwing over the consumer in this fashion. Again, it shows that they know that they can get away with it. But 2 is that really that we're going to fall for it again. Because let's be honest, guys, our track record in this department isn't great. Ultimately, this is a really shitty practice that CA are doing, but money talks and they wouldn't be doing this if it didn't pay off. I really hope I'm wrong though, and that this decision really backfires for them and it really makes them think about how to conduct their business practices in the future. But this comment from a Reddit user, I believe, sums it all up. If there's one thing I know about gamers, it's that we have short memories and deep wallets. And while we have that attitude, this trend will continue and Creative Assembly will do this again. And it's that, Total War fans, which really makes me worried for the future of Total War.